Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're going to be covering the newest DLC that's just come out for Planet Zoo. We've got the Eurasian Animal Pack, which has 8 or so really wonderful animals, and some animals that I've really been wanting to see in the game, coming from Eurasia. So that includes parts of Europe and parts of Asia. So I'm really excited to get stuck into this one. So, very interesting assortment. It's an animal pack, so we've got about 8 or so, unlike the last one, which was the Oceania pack, which only had 5 animals. Now we've got 8. So, really excited to get stuck into this one. This will be split into 2 parts because these animals got a lot of talk about, a lot of them. So, I've decided to split in 2 parts, and plus gives us plenty of time and ample time to talk about some of these wonderful animals. So we're going to be starting off with the exhibit animal as per always. So let us head down here. So let me go into Alt F2. We can see here this is Herman's tortoise. So let's get ourselves in a good position so we can watch them. They're quite cute, aren't they? Have a look. There we are. So here's a good look at these wonderful little tortoises. So this is the Herman tortoise. So these are a species of tortoise that are native to Europe and were named after John Herman, which is a French naturalist. And there's 2 subspecies, as we'll get into. So there's 2 subspecies known as the Western Herman's tortoise, which is the dominant subspecies, or Hermanni. And then there's the Eastern, which is Testudo Hermanni Bongetti, if you say that. So there's been also talks about these guys in the Russian tortoise potentially being their own genus, which is Testudo, even their own species as well, but it's kind of neither here nor there. And it seems like there is still a lot of gene flow between the 2 subspecies, so it's believed that this should all still be the same species. And there's also some rate of evolution mDNA shows that the eastern populations have actually evolved a little faster, and this is believed to be because of the ice ages. So the Balkans there was stronger fragmentation because of the ice ages with more ice caps and things like that. And apparently, and while this has been no profound implications for taxonomy, it suggests that there's more local forms than present, and it's maybe dubious to even unreliable to kind of get these molecular clocks, which is quite interesting. But anyway, Hermanni is the most famous one and has a number of local forms. Main differences is they got higher arches and different things, but it's not huge differences between these guys. The coloration on their head is typically dark green to yellowish with some dark patches, and there are some morphs with cheek spots and things, but you get a lot of variation, and even some have undivided shells, similar to Greek tortoises, but there's all sorts of different colors and variations you can get there. A lot of very interesting patterns as well. And then you have Bongetti, also known as the Dalmatian tortoise, that lives around the Balkans. So these guys have been reproductively isolated and considered a relic population since the last ice age. And they have arched, almost round carapaces, but they're normally flatter and more oblong. Quite similar in colour. They also vary in size, but they don't grow very big and can live for about 80 years. They also had brown to black heads. The forelegs have possess fine scales, things like that. Not too different, as they mentioned, they're subspecies, so they're still within the same species. But there has been some arguments to propose them as species, but it doesn't seem likely considering there's still a lot of gene flow between them. So these guys have quite a wide range. These guys can be found throughout most of southern Europe. So the western population, which is Hermanni, these guys can be found in eastern Spain, southern France, the Baltic Islands, Croatia, Sicily, Sardinia, Tuscany, and around Italy. And then the eastern population can be found in Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, Greece, places like that. And the oldest known evidence of Hermanni was actually in Sardinia around the early Pleistocene, so they've been there for at least 2 million years. However, there have been evidence to suggest that extant populations, or the living populations, of this and Emus ochlorus on Sardinia have actually been introduced recently, and also introduced onto Cyprus, either just probably by people, or either drifting by themselves. So there were populations there, but probably went extinct during ice ages, and then were reintroduced by either people or by rafting over time, which is really cool. It really shows how our ecology can be quite a bit more complicated than it seems. And then in terms of description, these guys are considered small to medium-sized tortoises from southern Europe. Young adults and adults have black and yellow patterned carapaces, or the brightness typically fades with age, and then they become more grey or straw. They also have slightly hooked jaws, and like other tortoises, have no teeth, just those really strong beaks. The scaly limbs can be greyish to brown, as you can kind of see there, with some yellow markings, as you can kind of see. As you can kind of see there. Let's see if we can get a better position. There we are. Really, really cute. And some yellow markings, and then their tails actually have bear a spur as well at the tip, which is quite interesting. And males typically, one way to tell male tortoises and turtles apart is that they have longer and thicker tails with developed spurs as well that distinguishes them. Typically, the eastern subspecies is typically a little bit bigger than the western. So, Hermanni reaches size about 28 centimeters in length. Or 11 inches, and they can range from 3 to 4 kilograms, with Tiumani really growing more than 18 centimeters, and some can be as small as 7 centimeters. So the Barangeti ones can be quite a bit bigger and almost a foot long, which is quite interesting. In terms of ecology, these guys early in the morning would tend to leave their night shelters, which are usually in hollows and thickets and things like that. Then they roam around during the day, the Mediterranean meadows for food, and they eat a variety of wild flowers in captivity, and they can use their sense of smell to determine what plants they eat. But some can be toxic to them, such as like dandelions and kale, which can be toxic even in captivity. So people would need to monitor the diets if they have captive tortoises. Then around midday, they go back to the hiding places, and they have a good sense of direction that allows them to find them. They can find these landmarks and things like that. And during late February, these guys will emerge from under bushes and rotting wood, where they spend the winter months brumating. They bury it in dead leaves and try to keep cool, keep it nice and protected from the elements. Immediately after surfacing, these guys will begin courtship displays and mating. So courtship can actually be quite a rough affair for the females, when she'll be pursued and rammed and bitten by males before being mounted. And aggression is often seen between rival males in seasons, which can result in competitions. A lot of tortoises will fight and ram each other. So typically between May and July, female Herman's tortoises deposit between 2 and 12 eggs into flask-shaped nests in the soil that can be up to 10 centimeters deep. And most females lay more than one clutch egg a season. And these pinkish-white eggs will incubate for about many days, as about 90 days. And like many reptiles, the temperature will be determined by what temperature they've been incubated will determine the sex of the babies. So at 26 degrees, only males will be produced, and at 30 degrees, all the hatchlings will be female. And young Hermans then will start to merge around autumn, in the early autumn rains in early September, and spend the first 4 or 5 years of life living within just a few meters of the nest. And if the rains do not come, or if the nesting takes place late in the year, the eggs will still hatch, but the young will remain underground and not emerge until the following spring. And until the age of 6 to 8, when their hard shells become fully developed, the young tortoises can be very vulnerable to predators, so they may fall prey to animals like rats, badgers, magpies, foxes, wild boars, and quite a few other animals. And if they survive those threats, they can live for about 30 years, with one rare record of a tortoise, Herman's tortoise, living about 31 years. And compared to other tortoises, longevity may actually be underestimated, and they may live up to 90 years. So they might be a lot more long-lived than we think. And in terms of hibernation, it's typically called hibernation, but it's more reptiles. They typically use brumation. So in nature, they'll dig their nests and kind of spend the mild Mediterranean winters in their burrows. And during that time, they will kind of slow their heart rate down and slow down their breathing. And they can be kept in captivity in a basement with like a rodent-proof lock and dry leaves, and the temperature should be about 5 degrees. As an alternative, they can be stored in a refrigerator, but they should not be used for like regular day-to-day use, as to permit airflow. And during hibernation, the ambient temperature must not fall below zero, and full-grown specimens may sleep for 4 or 5 months at a time. So they're also quite a common species to live in captivity as well, even in New Zealand, where we don't have a lot of reptiles that you can keep. You can keep Herman's tortoises, but they're really, really expensive. And they can be kept indoors with adequate living conditions, and they require a heat lamp with a basking area and also UVB bulbs to prevent things like MBD. And in terms of conservation, I believe they are considered least concern. No, they're near threatened. They're considered near threatened by the IUCN, and that's probably because of things like permitting and people taking them from the wild, also habitat destruction, things like that. many ways, but there has been a lot of conservation projects to try and protect these tortoises. There was a program actually in 1989 and 1990 to reintroduce tortoises to the population and putting like fences to reduce highway traffic to help tortoises and being introducing them to different places as well. So yeah, there's been a lot of little conservation going into these guys. I'm definitely a big fan of these guys. So let's have a look at the Zoopedia. Where is Zoopedia? This is the Herman's tortoise. They're threatened, a small species tortoise. Talk about most of that. You can see their range here. Hermann is it's an Italian one around here. These kind of populations, and the Balkan one is Bonghetti. I believe you say that. Let me just check that. Yep, that's the right one. And then this kind of Bonghetti here as well. Really, really cool. And then we have group sizes. So we have up to 16. There are 16 in here, but you don't have any babies because that's exhibit animals for you. They don't have a dominance hierarchy and are polygamous. They get about 16 to 23 centimeters long, so females are quite a bit bigger than the males. Life expectancy 90 years, which is actually pretty good. They're like a little bit ahead of the curve, since the oldest recorded one is 30, but it's often believed to be underestimated. With these guys as well, this is most likely going to be the Bonghetti one because they're the ones that get quite big, but they look more like pattern-wise to the Hermann ones. And their weight, 2 to 3 kilograms, 2 for males, 3 for females. So the females are slightly bigger. The age of sexual maturity is about 12 years. Yeah, that's all right. They can have babies till they die. 2 to 5 babies during per mating event. Incubation period is about 3 months. Into birth period, 12 months, and easy to reproduce in captivity. That's all pretty good. Research status, they hibernate for 6 to 12 weeks a year. True. The shell of Herman's tortoise is made up of 60 interconnected bones. True. The exact lifespan is unknown, but it's thought to be up to 120 years. That's in line with a lot of tortoises, so I'm not too worried about that. Herman's tortoises are the slowest growing tortoise species. That's also true. And because their shell hardens, young Hermans are vulnerable to predation from magpies, wild boar, foxes, and hedgehogs. That's true. Yep. And they don't share any benefit because they're an exhibit animal. But look at this little cutie. Look at these little goobers. I love these little goobers. Look at these little friends. I love tortoises so much. Little friends. So there's a lot of them in here. Really, really cool. Alright. We're going to let these guys do their thing, I think. Look at that one in there. Very cute. And there's one that walks around. There's like an animation where they walk around. So it's not like most exhibit animals. They do walk around a little bit, which is quite cool. And you can see one hiding in there. So yeah, really, really cool to get another tortoise as well. I do love the tortoises. So, next up, we are going to Eurasia for wild boars. So here's the wild boar, scientific name Sus scopa, also known as the wild pig, wild swine, all those kind of ones. In terms of these guys, they're native to much of Eurasia and North Africa, so they've got a huge range, but they've also been introduced into the Americas and into Oceania, and are actually considered one of the most widest ranging mammals in the world, which is quite cool. So in terms of these guys, they also went extinct in a few places. They went extinct in Britain. That's pretty much the only place they've really gone extinct. But the believed to be English for boar is short for the Old English bar, which is, we don't know the origin of that. But boar is typically used to refer to the males of male domestic pigs, but especially breeding males that haven't been castrated. So it's a lot of terminology things there. But in terms of the evolution, these guys originally are believed to come from Southeast Asia in the Philippines and Indonesia, and then spread out throughout Eurasia and then into Northern Africa. And these guys, the earliest fossils of these guys date to the early Pleistocene, and these guys are actually believed to be more closely related. The closest wild relative is the bearded pig of Malacca and the surrounding islands. So these guys are originally Southeast Asian, but moved across pretty much the world, which is quite interesting. In terms of subspecies, there's about 16 different subspecies recognized at the moment. As I mentioned, they've got such a huge range. There's all sorts of different subspecies in populations with different variability. Yep, that's the word. But they're typically divided into 4 regional subgroups. Those are the Western, the Indian, the Eastern, and the Indonesian. And they have small morphological differences, like more prominent manes, things like that. But these guys are most definitely kind of based on the Western kind of group, or the Central European boar, or Sus scopa, which is the dominant subspecies. So yeah, quite a few of them, which is quite interesting. In terms of domestication, well, this was the species that became domesticated, with the exception of Te Timor and Papua New Guinea pigs, which are actually descended from the Sulawesi warty pig. The wild boar is the ancestor of pretty much most living breeds, and they believed to be domesticated about 13,000 years ago around the Near East in the Taros Basin, but also independently probably domesticated in China and stuff, and Cyprus and the America, not in Americas, in Europe potentially like 3 or 4 times. So it was likely multiple domestication events, which is quite interesting. And in terms of description, as you can see, they're quite massively built, with like a stocky, short and relatively thin legs, with a thick skull and a thick trunk and all that. Really, really interesting. Um, they're capable of actually digging like 8 to 10 centimeters up with their face as well, and they can turn rocks at about 40 to 50 kilograms, so quite strong. They're also quite sexually dimorphic, so males typically tend to be 5 to 10% heavier or about 20 to 30% larger than the females. And the males, you can see here, got much larger kind of like a mane going down their back, which can be apparent in autumn and winter. And their canine teeth are also much more prominent, and they believe to grow throughout their lives. Though the upper canines are relatively short, these ones can be much sharper. Males also actually have a roughly egg-sized sac near the opening of the penis, which they use to make an odor to kind of, signal to the females, you could say. And there is a lot of variation in the size. If I look at the female, you can see the difference with the female here. Typically, adult size is actually determined a lot by environmental factors, depending what areas they live in. There could be a lot of variation because, as mentioned, there is so many different populations. There's a lot of variation within sizes. But in Europe, they can average about 75 to 100 kilograms for males and get to about 80 centimeters tall, or 30 to 31 inches, 150 centimeters of body length, while females are 60 to 80 kilograms, or 130, 180 pounds, 70 centimeters or 28 inches in shoulder height, and 140 centimeters in length, or 55 inches. In some areas, they can get as small, especially about the Mediterranean, they can get as low as 50 kilograms and 50 45 kilograms. Some they can get up to like 130 kilograms, especially in like Eastern Europe. And Central Europe, the largest males can get up to 200 kilograms. And there's lots of variation depending on where you are. And some of the like largest ones, so adult males and kind of Ursiland, so kind of like northern, it's like Siberia type areas, they've been way up to 350 kilograms. But it really just depends on where you are. So there's a lot of variation there. And you can see they've also got these winter coats. So they have a summer coat and a winter coat. You can see these winter coats typically quite a bit longer. Is that the male there? Let's see if you can find the other one. Long winter coats that protects them from, that's quite got long bristle hair and some downy fur under it that protect them from the cold. And there's variation, there's lots of colors as well, variation. Some could be very lightly colored or even white, some could be quite dark. A lot of variation depending on which subspecies or population you're talking about. And they also make a lot of different sounds, I mean. So they can create grunting noises and whine as contact calls. They also make alarm calls, like the kind of whine they make a lot, and there's cries as well. So you've probably heard most of them. You hear them mostly in domestic pigs as well, so it's not too weird. They've also got a very well developed sense of smell that they can use to actually like smell out mushrooms and things like that. They've actually been used as drug detection in Germany, which is really interesting. And they also have quite good hearing, comparatively weak eyesight, and lack color vision. But they're actually unable to recognize a standing human like 10 to 15 meters away, which is pretty interesting. And they're actually one of only 4 known mammalian taxa that actually possess mutations to protect against snake venom. And other animals that have this are mongoose, honey badgers, and hedgehogs, and all are able to pretty much able to protect against snake venom. And it also evolved separately in them all, so it must have been a big evolutionary pressure. It's quite interesting. So, in terms of their social life, these guys, boars are typically social animals, so they live in female-dominated herds, with sows being led by a matriarch. And male boars typically will lead their sounder in about 8 to 15 months, while the females remain and either establish new territories and remain with their mothers. Those subadults may also live in like loosely knit communities. So in terms of the breeding period, we'll have a look at the babies while I talk about the breeding period. Look at these cute little guys. Cute little piggies. So the breeding period lasts typically from November to January. The mating only lasts for about a month and a half. So prior to mating, the male will actually develop like armor to get to defend against rivals. So they just get fat. Um, they'll also just get bigger and wider. And once ready to reproduce, they'll move long distances to look for sows to breed with. And once the sowder has been located, the male will drive off young animals and chase the sows, and at the point will actually fight rivals. And then basically, this male will mate with up to 5 to 10 sows, and at the end of this rut, males are actually often quite badly mauled and lose 20% of their body weight because they're just so focused on protecting their sowder. And in terms of the gestation period, once she's obviously the female's pregnant, the gestation actually varies a lot according to the age of the mother. So typically, for first-time breeders, it'll be 114 to 130 days gestation, but in older sows, it can be up to 140 days. And farrowing, or having give birth, is March and May, but with the litter sizes being dependent on the age and nutrition of the mother. And these average litters will have about 4 to 6 piglets, with maximum being 10 to 12. And they're whelped in a nest constructed of twigs, grasses, and leaves. And should the mother die prematurely, the piglets will actually be adapted by another sow, which is actually quite interesting. In terms of piglets, newborn piglets get between 600 grams to a kilo, and they lack underfur, and they bear a single milk incisor and canine in each half of the jaw. There's intense competition between piglets and the most milk-rich nipples, and the best-fed one often usually survives. They have the runt of the litter. The piglets do not leave the lair for their first week or so of life, and should their mother be absent, they typically cuddle up to each other for warmth. And by 2 weeks of age, they will begin to accompany their mother on her journeys, and should danger be detected, they will go to cover and rely on their really interesting patterns here that they use for camouflage to protect themselves. Typically, they will lose this coat at about 3 months, and adult coloration will be attained at about 8 months of age. And although lactation lasts between 2.5 and 3.5 months, the piglets will actually start feeding on adult food at about 2 to 3 weeks, and their permanent dentition will be formed about 1 to 2 years. With the exception of the canines and the males, the teeth will actually stop growing in the middle of their 4th year, but the canines and old males will continue growing throughout their lives. And estrus will usually begin for they reach sexual maturity about the first year of age, with males attaining it at 2 years of age. However, estrus will usually occur after 2 years in sows, while males will actually begin rutting at about 4 to 5 years once they're actually competitive. And the maximum lifespan is typically 10 to 14 years. Though few specimens in the wild can live about 4 to 5 years, but boars in captivity have been known to live up to 20 years. So life is a bit rough in the wild, but it's not surprising. Let's have a look at you. Real pretty. In terms of their habitat, because these guys have such a wide range, they live in all sorts of different habitats. They live in alpine zones, mountainous zones. Most habitat in Europe is kind of mixed forest, broadleaf forests, also pine forests. They just have such varied habitats. In islands such as Komodo, these guys can be found in like savanna or up in monsoons. So they've just got such a huge range. They occupy pretty much every habitat between them, which is so interesting. They live in rainforests, they live in savannas, they live in everywhere pretty much, every single habitat pretty much, barring like really extreme ones and the ocean, of course. But in terms of their diet, another reason why they're so successful is that they're omnivores. So they can pretty much eat everything. So they'll eat roots, tubers, bulbs, berries and seeds, leaves, bark, and stuff like that. They'll even go through your garbage, earthworms, all sorts of small animals, and even carrion. So they'll typically eat a lot of those things. Typically, a 50-kilogram boar will need about 4,500 calories a day. That would increase during winter or being pregnant. So they will feed on pretty much whatever they can find. They'll feed on invasive. They'll raid crops. They'll just feed on whatever they can get their mouths around. And they've actually been known to feed on small vertebrates like newborn deers, chicks, and things like that. It even been eating a lot of fish, like carp and Caspian roach. Is quite interesting. And boars in those areas also feed on heron chicks, mollusks, and muskrats as well, which is quite interesting. And also, as well, there's been one record of a boar killing and eating a macaque, which is really interesting, and also one killing an adult female deer. So these guys can be potentially vicious predators. So I think that makes them super interesting. Let's see if we can find the male. There we are. Very, very interesting. In terms of predators, though, throughout most of their range, they are mostly eaten by wolves, but they'll also be eaten by lynxes, jungle cats, snow leopards, brown bears, martens. But their main predator throughout most of their range is the wolf, or the red wolf. And a single wolf can actually kill between 50 to 80 boars during the a year. But in areas like more into Southeast Asia, you get dholes. They'll eat them a lot. They'll also get leopards. Will eat them a lot as well. Even though they'll often prefer mouflon in some areas like Russian, in areas where their mouflon are there. Also in places like Kazakhstan and the Middle Asia, they would have been primary prey for tigers. Even though today tiger numbers are too low to have an effect on their population, and in a lot of the places like Kazakhstan, they're actually considered extinct, locally extinct. And they would have been good prey for them as well. And even in places like India, they would be another prey item. And in more region, they're also one of the two most important prey species for Siberian tigers, along with Waipati, which are deer. And on the island of Komodo, the main predator for boars are the Komodo dragons. So really a suite of predators like these guys. And in terms of the habitat, as I mentioned, reconstructed range, so kind of what that originally was. They lived from North Africa right into the British Isles and Korea and the Sunda Islands. So, and right up to Himalayas and pretty much all of Eurasia and North Africa, these guys are found, except for like the most northernly areas where there's like tundra and things like that. But pretty much those kind of areas that can be found in. Though recently there has been some changes. They have become extinct in places like the UK. They used to be found in Finland, but now they've been kind of taken out by hunting. The last boar in Egypt died in 1912. And there has been some revival of boar populations by the 1950s, where they had kind of reintroduced into a lot of their range. They've actually been reintroduced into Great Britain as well, so there's small populations of about a few hundred boars living in Great Britain, which is really good because of rewilding. Because they originally went extinct around the 17th century during the English Civil War, but luckily they're doing okay now. So there's potentially a lot of reintroduction efforts as well that could be really interesting, and they've managed to re-establish themselves in a lot of areas. But now they're still considered least concerned. In terms of places they've been introduced where they've become invasive, they've been introduced to North America where they spread diseases, also mingling with feral pigs, but they do get eaten by alligators and things like that, so they're probably a little bit of a good thing. Um, though there have been like 30 to 50 feral hogs and can be within your neighborhood, things like that. It's really a bad issue there, and they eat a lot of it. Being such voracious omnivores, they eat pretty much everything, and it's bad for invasive species as well. Also, they've been introduced to places like Australia and New Zealand for hunting, and also introduced in South America as well. And all the same issues pretty much apply, but there are efforts to try and control them. But in terms of their relationship with humans, they were very important prey species for humans pretty much throughout history. And then, of course, we eventually domesticated them. They've been a really important part. It's like for food. They've been domesticated. There've been lots of cultural things like in Greece. They've got that big boar. I forgot the name of it. That big boar that's like got an impenetrable hide. Something boar. It's like, I'm thinking of the Nubian lion, but it's a lion. A Tuscan boar or something like that. Be a really, really interesting, really, really cool. How can you not love these boars? Such awesome animals. So yeah, another cool one. So let's have a look at the Zoopedia. I was almost forgot actually. So mentions all the information, and you can just see how wide their range is, even missing parts of North Africa. So they've got such a huge range. The only places you can't really find them are the most northerly parts and like the high parts of the Himalayas. A group size 3 to 30, so up to 1 male, up to 29 females. Bachelor groups 3 to 9. Female bachelor groups are like 3 to 30. Dominance. So sounders are led by dominant matriarchs, male dominance based on size. They are polygamous. Matriarchal, so males refer to later to alphas become outsiders. They're confident with humans, but guests cannot enter their habitats. In terms of their size, about 93 centimeters at the shoulder on average, about 83 centimeters for females, about 20 years for both of them. As much as captivity. Males about 103.75. So these are definitely kind of your central Eurasian, but I can see mods. If anyone wants to make mods like some of the different subspecies, that'd be quite interesting. They reach age of sexual maturity about 1 year, though, as we mentioned, probably about 2 years for males, and they probably don't start breeding until 2 to 5 years of age anyway. Age of sexual sterility is 12 years. That's right for me. 2 to 5, yep, mentioned that. Though they can be up to like 10 to 12, which is interesting. 3 months incubation, that's probably about 100 days, 3 or 4 months. That's pretty good, spot on. Into birth period, 12 months. Very easy to breed in captivity, not surprising. Some facts, we already mentioned that. They've actually used, hair's been used in toothbrushes. Hair used to be used in toothbrush bristles. That's interesting. Maybe it's grey wolf. Yeah, we've already talked about that. And they have some other species they like living with, which we will be talking about this episode. Next one's coming up, Mute Swan, and then we'll be talking about finishing off part one with the Wisent. So, next up, we're going to be moving on to our next animal. We have got the Mute Swan. So, really, really awesome. I know everyone's been wanting more birds, so it's really awesome to see these guys. So the mute swan are a species, all called Cygnus oro. These guys are a species of swan and a waterfowl, and native to much of Euro-Siberia, and can be found even in far north of Africa. Though they have been introduced in the United States and some populations living in Australasia. So in terms of their name, the mute, because these guys are much less vocal than other species of swan, where they get the name mute swan. And as I mentioned, these guys are native to like Eurasia, well, mainly Europe, you could say. They actually, believe it or not, their closest relatives are the black swan of Australia and the black-necked swan of South America, which is quite interesting. And they're monotypic with no other subspecies. And they were named by the German naturalist Johann Friedrich Gellner as Anas honor in 1789, but put the new genus Cygnus in 1803, which means swan in Latin. So literally, its name is swan in Latin. So in terms of its evolution, there have been some fossils found around Great Britain about 6,000 years ago, and they've been reported in Ireland, France, things like that. So they believe to be kind of around the areas. And as well, there's also a close relative, the giant swan Cygnus falconeri, which lived around Sicily and Malta in the middle Pleistocene. So lived with like things like the Sicilian dwarf elephant. In terms of description, these guys are huge. They typically range between 140 160 centimeters, or about 55 to 63 inches. Though in extreme cases, have got about 125 to 170 centimeters, or about 49 to 67 inches, with a 200 to 240 centimeter wingspan, about 79 to 94 inches. So males are typically larger than females, with a larger knob on their bill, and on average they are the second largest waterfowl after the trumpeter swan, though male mute swans may actually match or even exceed a male trumpeter in size. And adults measurements, they got the wing cord, I won't go through all that. But you can see they've got that white plumage, with their legs being quite dark grey, and the beak of the mute swan, as you can see, is quite orange with like a black around their nostrils and a black nail. As I mentioned as well, they're pretty much one of the heaviest living extant flying birds, so they're one of the largest birds that can fly. In terms of several studies, males have been weighed about 10 to 11 kilograms, with a weight range of even up to 14 kilograms, or about 32 pounds, for a large male mute swan. Though females get between 7 to 10 kilograms, or 17 to 30 kilograms, with a top normal weight of a big cob being about 15 kilograms. And there's believed to be one that's even been 23 kilograms, or 51 pounds, so one unusually big one. And it actually counts as the largest weight of a flying bird ever, so it's the largest verifiable one. That was actually questionable, though it is a flying bird, mute swans can fly, that particular individual could actually fly. But yeah, that was a big animal, so it's like 23 kilograms, so that's huge. So young birds are called cygnets, as you can see. We'll have a look here. These guys are nowhere near as big as obviously adults because they're babies, but they're not that bright white that mature adults are. They have a dullish, greyish, dull colour, and not orange in their first year of life. And they may actually range from pure white to grey to bluff, with being grey bluff is most common. They also have a leucistic gene as well. Cygnets can also grow quickly, reaching their adult size in approximately 3 months of hatching, and they retain their grey feathers until they're at least a year of age, and they will get that flight feathers, while they get replaced with their flight feathers in the air. And all mute swans are white in maturity, though the feathers around their head and neck may often be stained by tannins and iron in the water, which is quite interesting. So in terms of behavior, mute swans typically nest on large mounds with where they build vegetation on the waterside, edge of lake. They're also monogamous and often reusing the same site each year and restore and rebuilding it as it's needed. Male and female swans will share and take care of the nest, but once a cygnet is fledged, it's not common to see whole families looking for food. They feed on a wide variety of vegetation, both aquatic plants and, as you've seen, grazing on land. They also will eat a lot of agricultural crop plants such as wheat and things like that. And they'll also be known to feed on small aquatic insects, frogs, and things like that. But also, unlike black swans, which are actually one of their closest relatives, they're usually strongly territorial with a single pair on smaller lakes. Though in a few locations with large areas of sustainable food habitat, they will live together. The largest colonies have over 100 pairs, such as colonies in southern England and some around the Baltic Sea, have nests spaced as little as 2 meters apart. Non-mated juveniles live up to 3 to 4 years old, commonly form larger flocks, which can total up to several hundred birds. And there's some that got a few hundred birds there. Once the adults are mated, they seek out the territories, often live close to gulls and ducks, which makes you take advantage of the swan's ability to reach deep water, as they tend to spread them out on the water surface. So it's a little bit of benefit there. As we mentioned, they're not quite as vocal as your whooper or Benwick swans, though they do make sounds such as grunting, hoarse, whistling, and snorting noises. And during a courtship display, they'll utter a rhythmic song that can synchronize with the movements of head and necks, and they'll have these dancing things. We probably won't see the animation, but that's how they do to breed. So they have been represented that in the game, and they'll also do animations like to mate and breed with each other, which is really, really cool. They'll also they could technically be employed to distinguish a bonded pair from two dating swans. So they will date and then they'll bond, of course, which is quite interesting. And mute swans usually has competitors or intruders trying to get their territory. And the most familiar sound is like that violent throbbing of the wings in flight, which is actually unique to the species, which is quite interesting as well. Those cygnets as well, little baby ones, can be quite vocal. They make lots of whistling and chirping sounds, which are quite cute, of course. And these guys are also quite aggressive. So they're quite very aggressive in defending their nests. So, and their mate and offspring. In most defenses act, they'll hiss, they'll also charge and strike and use their bony spurs on their wings to kind of attack other animals as well. So that's another thing. They'll often actually have been known to kill intruders in their territory. They've been known to kill other swans, geese, and ducks by drowning them or pecking them to death, which is quite interesting. And even large waterfowl have been driven off by mute swans and people. So these are like the anti-Canadian geese. So these guys will beat them up. And they'll even be known to attack people when they enter the territory. And usually that's the male that's being the most offensive. And they'll often defend them in the water, and they'll even attack small watercraft like canoes if they feel like it's a threat to their young. And other places, especially where they've been introduced, they'll kind of fight them off. But they've been known to be prey of cygnets of common snapping turtles, and America is quite a common prey. Golden eagles, things like that. Most of their prey predators are in the American populations. And England, there's actually been an increased rate in England of dog attacks on these guys, but it's considered criminal in British law, and they've been placed on the highest protection. So they'll readily attack dogs and protect the babies from them. And they've even been known to kill large dog breeds, which is quite interesting. But in America, they are really preyed upon, though lynxes, bears, and coyotes have been known to kill sick adults, which is interesting. And that familiar pose with their neck curved back and their wings half raised is called busking. And it's a threat display, so it's like, hey, don't mess with me. And like other species, these guys, mute swans, have been known to grieve, so they'll grieve for loss of a mate. And they'll go through that mourning process in case they lost a mate, either stay with their counterpart lived, or they'll even fly off and join a flock. Should one of the pair die with the cygnets present, the remaining parent will basically take the responsibility and take care of the babies, which is quite cute. In terms of breeding, they'll typically lay between 4 to 10 eggs, with the female brooding at about 36 days, and then these cygnets will normally hatch around May to July. The young do not achieve the ability to fly until they're about 120 to 150 days old, and this limits the distribution of the species of the edge of the range because they need to learn to fly before ponds and lakes reach over, so that kind of limits how northerly they can go. In terms of their distribution habitat, they've been found mainly in temperate areas. They can be found in the Palearctic and as far east of Primitive Kari, I believe you say that. But they're partially migratory throughout the northern latitudes, as they can be found in Europe and Asia, but as far south as the Mediterranean and North Africa. They've also been known in nesting in Ireland as a vagrant, as well as Bermuda, which is interesting. And while most current population is in Japan is introduced, mute swans have been seem to have been around 1,000 years ago, and wild birds from the mainland population will still come in winter. So they were introduced, but they did used to live there apparently in history, which is quite interesting. But they're also protected in a lot of their range and often kept in captivity because people like them in pools and things like that. And the descendants of these escapees that lived around these ponds have naturalized and live around the Great Lakes as much as the Canadian goose has done in areas similar, because people just like them. So the wild population today, the native population is about 500,000 at the end of the breeding season, with up to about 350,000 in Russia, with the largest breeding population being about 11,000 pairs in the Volga Delta. The population in the UK is about 22,000 birds, roundabout, and the other significant populations, Germany has about 4,500 pairs, Ireland has about 1,700 pairs, so there's about a few thousand pairs between each country or so. They have been domesticated because people like the look of them, and they're considered a royal bird and things like that. Though populations in Western Europe were actually largely exterminated throughout the 13th and 19th century, except for the semi-domesticated birds and poultry. Though better protections allowed them to recover as well, so that's really, really good. Though there have been some declines because of poisoning from lead shots and discarded fishing weights full of lead that's hurt these guys. But luckily, once alternatives were found, they've actually recovered quite well. And as I mentioned, there's quite a few introduced populations, such as North America, and they're considered invasive species in North America. There are a couple small populations. There's about 200 in Japan, about 200 in New Zealand and Australia combined, with a population, I think the largest one's about 100 in Australia, and about 120 in South Africa. So as I mentioned as well, they were introduced into America by in the late 19th century, but they're considered invasive. And the population is growing, so people are like, oh, we don't really want this. And the state of this swan is, there has been some people like trying to save the mute swans and say they're native to the region and therefore deserve protection, which is not true, but it's kind of been rejected. There's people trying to save them. It's just people like them. It's invasive species things. A lot of people like them. But there have been a lot of people trying to get rid of this invasive population, which is a good thing in my opinion. But obviously, it's going to be some flashback when they're considered an important cultural animal. And in Oceania, as I mentioned, they have absolute protection in New Zealand until about 2010, when now they can they still have protection, but not allowed to be killed or held in captivity at the discretion of the Minister of Conservation. And there's a small population that lives in Perth, but there'll need to be fewer than 100 individuals. And as I mentioned, they're quite important culturally. They become the national bird of Denmark, and before that, the skylark was the national bird. The British monarch reminds ownership of all unmarked mute swans in open water, so it's kind of like a cultural thing as well. And yeah, really, really cool. I really do like the mute swans. Very, very awesome animals. So let's have a look at their Zoopedia. So mute swans, population unknown, least concern, so that's good. As I mentioned, they live throughout most of Asia and Europe and like that. So that's their population around the world, though the introduced populations mentioned Australia, New Zealand, and around America, which is not a good thing. Invasive species definitely in America, but you can see that's their population, very like widely spread out. Still cool. In terms of group size, 2 to 50, so up to 25 males, up to 25 females. Badge groups 2 to 50 for both males and females. Dominance, none. They are monogamous. They are gregarious, so all mature offspring are tolerated by the group. And a relationship with humans, they are confident and guests can into their habitat, which is quite interesting. In terms of size, 1.55 meters long for males and 1.3 for females, makes sense. 30 years, yep, and weight about 11 kilograms for males, 9 for females. That's pretty good. Age of sexual maturity is about 3 years. That works good. Babies till they die, that's also good. Number of offspring remaining about 3 to 5, yep. Incubation about 1 month, though I'd probably put it about 2 months, should be probably 60 days, that's 2 months pretty much. Into birth period, about 12 months, that's good, and very easy to breed in captivity. And although they're monogamous, they do not mate for life, and they have several partners throughout their lifetime, depends. As we already mentioned that. They're highly intelligent, have been known to bear grudges, not surprising. Mute swans have been introduced to North America as ornamental birds for ponds, and that means that escaped birds could survive comfortably in the wild and become invasive as well. In English, the typical coloration of a mute swan is referred to as a royal swan, with a leucisticomorph being a Polish swan. So that's quite interesting. And interspecies enrichment, you can see other species you can house them with. But yeah, really, really cool. Love these guys. Have a look at the different variation there. Really, really awesome. Definitely a big fan. Nice to see another bird in the game. Do always love seeing birds. Okay, so let's move on to the last animal of part one. So here's everyone's favorite. Oh, this is one animal that I've wanted for a while. I just love these animals. So here we have got the wisent. That's the male there. So this is the wisent, or the European bison, also called the European wood bison or the European buffalo. But I'll use wisent as that's what the game uses. So these are a European species of bison and one of the two species of living species of bison, including the American bison. These guys are the heaviest wild land animal in Europe and may have actually been even larger in prehistory, which is quite interesting. And we'll talk about their conservation. They've got a really awesome conservation story too, so we're going to talk about that. So, in terms of entomology, the ancient Greeks and Romans named the bison as kind of where bison came from. But they typically, zebu actually comes from Polish, which is Polish for bison as well. So they've got a few different names. Indian bison are not that closely related. They're all in the boss, but they're clearly different. But yeah, really, really cool. In terms of their description, they're the heaviest living land animal in Europe. That's wild, of course. And similar to the American cousins, they're actually potentially larger in history. But these guys are still quite huge. So modern animals get between 2.8 and 3.3 meters long, or about 9 to 10 feet long. And not counting the tail, they also reached about 1.8 to 2.1 meters, or about 5.9 to 6'9" in height, and about 615 to 920 kilograms, or 1,356, or 2,000 to 28 pounds in weight for males. Females are slightly smaller, about 2.4 to 2.9 meters, or about 7 to 9 feet long, about 1.6 to 1.97 feet, or like 5'5" to 6'5" at the shoulder, and between 424 and 630 kilograms, or between 900 and about 1,300 pounds. So there's a lot of variation within that. You get these pretty big bulls, as we're getting to. In free roaming populations, there's been some recorded well over like 600 kilograms, and there's occasional big bull can get over 1,000 kilograms. Some older records have been saying of up to like 1,900 kilograms, which is quite interesting. But they're on average typically lighter than American bison, but they are much taller at the shoulder than their American relatives, which is quite interesting. They also, in terms of some differences as well. Let's see. So some other differences these guys have, they're typically a little bit taller, they have shorter hair on the neck, longer tails and horns, and we'll get into their ecology. Their ecology is actually quite a bit more different. They also make a variety of vocalizations. They'll grunt, as you can hear that there, and they'll make these sounds during the breeding season as well. So very similar to other cows as well. Prehistorically, the European bison tend to live throughout most of Europe, around the Volga River and up to the Caucasus, and that would have, of course, kind of declined over time. During the Middle Ages or Antiquity, their range had decreased as people cut down forests and things like that, but they were still common in a lot of places. They believed to live around like Greece around in the 3rd century AD, so the Greeks would account them a lot. But sadly, they declined more and more and more until pretty much they became nearly extinct in 1899. So they kind of increased. Luckily, there were kind of efforts to try and protect them, luckily, during the early 20th century. So during the early 20th century, they killed 600 European bison as well. And then the rest were pretty much held in zoos until they went down after World War II, after the 1950s or something like that. Where is it? Around 1899, there was only about 12 left. And of the two different subspecies, there's like the Caucasus one, lowland one. So all the living bison, the European bison, or all the living wisent are descended from this population in captivity. So they were extinct in the wild pretty much just about 200 years ago. But after World War II, pretty much things like that, they started to reintroduce them around like the 1929. And then there's been efforts to reintroduce them. So about 2005, 2007, there were bison. And then up to about 2014, there was about 1,500 bison living in the wild now, or 1,500 wisent living in the bison in Poland. And then eventually they have been reintroduced to even places such as Britain, which is quite interesting. There's a small population of Britain now that's living, that's rewilding. There's a small population, but it has generally been increasing. So, gone from nearly extinct to near threatened, extincted wild to near threatened is a pretty good achievement for these guys. Really, really awesome. So, in terms of their genetic history, there have been some evidence these guys actually bred with aurochs in history, which is quite interesting, up to 10% of the genome. So, that's quite interesting. But we'll talk more about their behavior and things like that. In terms of their social structure, these guys are herd animals, so they live in both mixed and solely male groups. So mixed groups will have adult females and calves about 2 to 3 years old, and young adult bulls. The average herd size is much smaller than that of the American bison, typically between 8 to 13 animals, though typically herds solely of bulls will have on average about 2 individuals. So very similar to a lot of other bison species as well. They'll live in a matriarchal group, so there's a lead female and she'll move around. And although bulls are large and heavy, the oldest and most powerful males will usually satellite and hang around these groups as kind of protection as well, which is quite interesting, and males will hold a territory. So in terms of reproduction, the rutting season for these guys typically begins from August throughout October, and bulls are aged 4 to 6 years old, although sexually mature are prevented from mating with other bulls. So typically, they'll only mate when they're like big enough to mate, really, to compete. And cows usually have a gestation period of about 264 days and give birth to one cute little calf at a time. Very, very cute little. Let me click on here. Look at this little cutie. Cute little bison. On average, males weigh about 27 kilograms at birth, while females 24. Body size of males will kind of increase proportionally at the age of 6 years, and they'll typically slow grow around 3 to 5. And bulls will reach sexual maturity at the age of 2 years, while cows will reach their sexual maturity at the third year. And also, European bison have been known to live about to 30 years in captivity, but they're wild, it can be shorter. The lifespan of a wild bison is about 18 to 24 years. The females will live longer than males. And productive breeding ages for wisent is about 4 to 20 years in females and only 6 to 12 in males, since that's when they reach their prime. Really, really wonderful animals. They're really interesting about these guys as well in terms of their diet. These guys predominantly eat grasses, but they're much more of a browser than American bison. So they'll also browse on shoots and leaves and also go through forests and kind of break through leaves and things like that. They're quite important large herbivore in those ecosystems. They'll break through forests and break through the undergrowth to allow more light in and allow for new growth as well. So these guys are a little bit more adapted for moving through forests and adapted to eating plants and shoots and things. That's one big difference between them and the American bison. And in terms of conservation, as I mentioned, throughout the 15th to 18th centuries, they were protected, but a lot of hunting over the time kind of diminished their population, as I mentioned. And the modern herds are actually only descended from all 12 ancestors I mentioned. There's only all of them are descended from these 12 animals that were kind of saved and put in zoos. And then they were bred in captivity and released into the wild around the beginning of the 20th century, so about 100 or so, a little over 100 years ago. So, but these guys have been really doing well. 1950s, introduced in 1951, introduced into the wild. Then now there's free roaming herds all across like Russia and lots of parts of Europe, and they've been doing quite well. And luckily, the Wilderbleen project has actually reintroduced bison, or trying to reintroduce bison, just last year. And this is the first population of bison to live in the UK after 6,000 years, although there was an successful attempt in Scotland in 2011. So they're doing quite well, which is quite interesting, with a herd of 3 females and a male has been introduced, I believe, around October, which is quite interesting. And unknown to the rangers, one was pregnant, so they gave birth in October in 2022. So this was the first wild bison born in the UK for the first time in a millennia, which is really, really cool. But yeah, there's all sorts. The total wild population now going down from 12 to 12 in captivity. Now the population is, as of 2019, 7,500 wild bison, wild wisent, which is really, really awesome. With most of them living around Poland, and I think that's the biggest one. Yeah, around Poland. There's about 2,000 in Poland. and Romania. That's where they kind of most of their populations are. But they're scattered all around the country, so they're really wide, all around the countries of Europe. So there is a lot of varied places for them to live. So if anything happened to one population, you can supplement it with another. But that's really, really cool. All sorts. And as I mentioned, there's the population in the UK now. So they typically found Belarus, Poland, those are the biggest ones, but there's lots of all sorts around the place, which is cool. And in terms of their cultural significance, because people, like, we have cave paintings and then people really revered them, they were considered like national animals of Belarus and things like that. But yeah, really, really cool. Really awesome conservation story, as I mentioned. Went from only 12, now there's a few thousand. They went, as I mentioned, from pretty much like extinct to the wild to near threatened now, which is really, really cool. But yeah, we'll have a look at the Zoopedia. So look, Wisent, wild population is about 2,000, but the population, which is awesome, and that's considered near threatened, because most of them live in protected areas now where they've been reintroduced, so they're doing okay in that regard. So today, the Wisent is considered near threatened. By the end of the 20th century, they were driven to extinction. Only 6 individuals remained in captive managed groups. They're often widespread protection, and reintroduction programs saved from disappearing completely. But there are some issues, as we'll get into. There's also things like hybridization, inbreeding, depression, because they are all descended from 12 individuals. And also, like, habitat degradation is another big thing, deforestation, habitat loss, which affects a lot of species in Europe. But yeah, cool. Really positive outlook for the Wisent, though, so that's quite cool. But you can see the populations, there's a lot of varied spots there. You can see that's probably like Belarus and Poland where they mostly live, but there's some all around, and even in Russia as well. So quite a varied area where they live in, which is quite cool. So group size, population, or there should be about 12 to 13 individuals, so one male up to 12 females. Batch groups, 2 to 8 for males and 2 to 13 for females. Dominance is matriarchal herds and dominant bulls. Mating system is polygamous. Maturation, so mature males related to alpha become outsiders. Relationship with humans is neutral, and guests cannot enter the habitat as they are large, dangerous animals. Average size 1.95 centimeter, 1.95 meter tall at the shoulder for males, and 1.85 for females. That sounds about right. 21 years for male and female. That sounds about right as well. Average weight as well, 700 kilograms for males, 530 for females. That sounds about right too. As I mentioned, you can get some really big males that potentially get into the 1 to 2 ton range, or nearly up to 2 tons, so get quite big. Age of sexual maturity is about 3 years. That's right. As mentioned, like 6 years for prime breeding for males, just because they need to be big enough to compete. As well, 20 years sexual sterility. That's also good as well. 1 calf per mating event. That's good. 9 months breeding. Yep, that sounds about right. And interbirth period is about 24 months, and they are easy to breed in captivity, so that's quite good. In terms of their research status, so in Poland, the Wisent is known as a zebu and as national animal as well. During summer months, they can eat up to 32 kilograms of food in a day. The Wisent used to be heavily hunted for its hide, meat, and horns. They used to make drinking horns. We already went over the weight, but this is really cool. There used to be 3 subspecies of Wisent, 2 of which are fully extinct now. The Carpathian Wisent living in Bulgaria, the Caucasian Wisent native to the Caucasus. Any type specimen was the Wisent we know today. And the only subspecies to recover from extinction. Whether those subspecies are true subspecies or not, we can get into debate at that. But there is 1 bull from the Caucasian Wisent that was one of the 12, so there's very likely all the living Wisent today are kind of hybrid population. They're hybrid subspecies or a hybrid population. Still, it was that desperate doesn't really matter, but it'd be interesting to see if they kind of re-evolve some of that, like those traits, which is quite interesting. But yeah, really, really awesome. Love the Wisent. I just love their conservation story, and I love the look at them. Just so interesting. Coming back from 12 animals, and we can see it's happened a lot with animals today. You know, a great example, you know, the Arabian oryx, Purina David's deer, shows that once we can do a lot of good conservation work, we just need to give them the time, and we can do some great things. We're not all just destroying the world all the time. But yeah, really, really cool. So really come out wonderfully. So this will be part 1. So we've covered 4 animals, and the other ones are all going to be the Asian ones. So these are mostly Asian ones. That you could argue the wild boars, true Eurasian. Then we'll be talking about most of the Asian animals in the next episode. So yeah, I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye.